morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. And I just wanted to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Natalie Evans. I'm a partner and head of assurance at GGFL. Thanks for joining us this morning. We've got a really important topic to talk about. And to get us started, just a bit of a preamble, because here we are heading into the second half of 2022. I think the worst of the pandemic is hopefully behind us. If you're superstitious, do something about the fact that I just said that, please. But for business owners who've already been through so much over the past 2 years, the challenges, they just keep on coming. Something I'm not going to talk about is inflation and supply chain and labor shortages and all of those other things that we know are going on in the world. But today, the really important focus is really about the constant and growing threat of cybercrime. So we're going to take our head out of the sand today. It's easy to stick it there sometimes, but it's something that we need to talk about. And at GGFL, we often work with clients to make sure that their business operations are as robust as possible to withstand the uncertainty and the pressures that they may face. Increasing awareness around cybercrime and cybersecurity is really a natural extension to this, as it represents a real risk to our clients and their financial security, and that's what today's about. So it's also an area that extends well beyond our area of expertise at GGFL. We've brought in an expert to really just get to the nuts and bolts of it, discuss the steps small, mid-sized businesses can take to prevent cybercrimes from occurring, and despite all our best efforts, what to do if a breach takes place. So Matt Holland, welcome Matt. Matt's one of the world's leading authorities in cybersecurity industry. He started his career at communications security establishment. He spent several years, 7 years, in fact, in the Tailored Access Operations Group as a leading security researcher specializing in intelligence, tradecraft, and technology for key top secret projects of the Five Eyes. This is Hollywood stuff to me, Matt, but the Five Eyes, which is an intelligence alliance comprised of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. From there, today, Matt's a founder and chief executive officer and chief technology officer of Ottawa-based Field Effect. Their mission is to strengthen the IT security operations of businesses of all sizes. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Natalie. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat today.
We're happy, and I'm just going to dive right into it and ask you to get us started, because we're coming from different places in terms of our experience and knowledge around cybersecurity and cybercrime. So can you start just with the big picture?
Yeah, absolutely. So cybersecurity is something that I think we've all optimistically for the past 20 years hoped would get sorted out. And every new technology that rolls out, every new mobile device or security feature, I think us in the industry, we were always hoping that at some point there'd be a turning point where we see less harm and less bad things happening to people and businesses around the world. And in the unfortunate reality is things are continuing to get worse, which I guess is probably not the best way to start a Wednesday morning, talking about the bad side of things. But the reality is more and more technology is being introduced into the world, and the amount of attention that goes into building security into the technology stacks or devices or whatever that's being created, it's still not enough. And where we stand today is, as every business becomes more and more digitized, more and more interlinked. The whole supply chain issue is really throwing, showing the fragility of global economics and then how companies are linked together. Throw not ideal cybersecurity into the mix, and that really makes things even worse. So if we look at just the past year, from 2020 to 2021, ransomware payments went up 78% and now average $540,000. And that is really insane. And the depressing thing is, as a company owner or a decision maker, this is something you can entirely prevent. So the bright side is there are things you can do.
And I'm looking forward to hearing about those, because it really is about readiness and preparedness. And we can't even really get there until we understand really what we're faced with, right? And I know based on what you said, this is getting bigger, it's growing, it's global, it really can touch anybody at any time. And I know we've heard a lot, you can't look at the news in any given day and not see something about this. And, we hear about attacks on large institutions, we hear about attacks on individuals. And you know, a lot of the participants today and even ourselves sit in the middle of that when it comes to small, sort of medium enterprise business. I mean, we clearly should be worried about it. I want you to just sort of lean us into how big that threat is and how much should we really be worrying about prevention, and how much attention of ours that this should have as business owners.
Yeah, so from a risk standpoint, the unfortunate reality is an effective cyber attack can basically shut your company down. If you look at the composition or the IT composition of an SME versus an enterprise will have desktops, servers, cloud resources. Enterprises have the resources to build teams to protect all of that, but SMEs do not. There's just not enough people in the world for SMEs to build internal security teams, not to mention the cost of technology is largely prohibitive for them to build similar stacks to enterprises. So the reality is small to medium businesses have the same attack surface as enterprises, just in different quantities. So if somebody is going to attack an enterprise, the enterprise probably has a decent amount of defense in place, where an SME does not. Now, on the outcome side of things, an example I like to use is a company called Levitas Capital out of Australia. And this is, I think, a really poignant example of a worst case scenario, but also, unfortunately, very, very realistic. In November of 2020, one of the executives received a Zoom link. I receive Zoom links all the time. I think a lot of people listening today probably do meetings over Zoom all the time. So receiving Zoom links is something we all get. Now, this Zoom link happened to be a link to basically a malicious malware set. So when the exec clicked on that Zoom link, malware got installed on the exec's computer. Didn't know it was a relatively decent set of malware. So there's no malware is being installed on your computer pop-up box. It just happened behind the scenes. The attacker then profiled the email, profiled customers, learned about the business, and it basically transitioned into a business email compromise. And in this example, I guess what that means is, when you think about how you transact business on the day-to-day, email is a big part of it. And the attacker learned about the patterns, about the banking setup and whatnot. And Levitas Capital was actually a hedge fund company. And what the attacker did was actually issue payments from Levitas Capital's account out to different accounts. And because the attacker had control over the exec email, they could just approve those payments. And about, they tried several. One big one got through. And unfortunately, I think it was in the range of $1.2 million being transferred out to an account. By the time they noticed, the attacker had already gotten a plane and left the country. But the bigger outcome is the breach of trust in the people and companies who had invested in that fund. And the reality, and I guess the outcome was they pulled their money and said this isn't a trustworthy company. I can't work with you. And the result today is Levitas Capital is no more because they had to shut down. And this whole thing, it's a period of days when this can happen. So it really highlights, the importance of being preventative and proactive about taking cybersecurity seriously. But also, at the other end of the spectrum, what can happen? I think there's this false assumption that if you get cyber insurance, that everything's great, and it helps, but it does not prevent your company from being, permanently damaged from a cyber attack.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up. And I think it's something that we're going to circle back around to later. And you also brought up the concept of trust. And it's really, who can you trust? And that'll sort of feed into that conversation. But the damage that can be done to businesses in terms of their reputation, and really fundamentally, it does come back down to trust, are things that we probably all lose sleep over at night, right? So I know you mentioned malware, and I identify with that. I have received emails from people and no links, not even a link, not asking me for anything. But I thought this is strange. Like, this seems out of character. They're not speaking the way that I would normally expect them to speak with me, and via email. And I've called them and they've said, I didn't send that. That's terrifying, because to become engaged that way, I think we're all pretty smart individuals, but to become engaged that way can be very, very easy and has nothing to do with how intelligent you are, period, full stop, right? So it can really happen to anybody. So that's a might be a worst case scenario, but I think it's also a very real thing that obviously happens and can happen probably more often than we'd like to think. So, and just to go back to the example that you used of malware, I mean, I know that there's so many different ways and things that people can do to attack, right? And so what kinds of things should small, medium enterprise business owners be worried about? And I gave one sort of random example of my own experience, but what do you think we should be aware of in terms of our level of in the know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The unfortunate thing that the cybersecurity industry often does is throw too many acronyms into the mix and define all these different types of, I guess, malware. And at the end of the day, if you focus more on, how you can manage the security problem, then it kind of gets simplified. So I think the securing your email is step one. Being aware of the accesses that are happening. There's this, a lot of people are moving into M365 and G Suite, and those are both really good options. But there's this incorrect assumption that because Microsoft and Google are managing your email, that they're also taking care of the security side of things, and that just isn't really the case. So having protection around your email, to be aware of what type of accesses are being made to somebody logging in from the other side of the world. There's a lot of noise and logging that is available when you use these systems, but bringing on a vendor to really make sense of it all is a key part. We see a lot of inbound customers, or not customers at the time, but companies that need help, that have business email compromises, and it's simply because somebody figured out the password and got in there. Little things like multi-factor authentication make a big difference, but having that third party to really vet all the activity without reading your email, it's not a privacy or data compromise or anything like that. It's more looking at the metadata around what's happening and looking for strange things. That's a really big thing. A common attack we see is or a type of business email compromise is somebody gets phished and you end up giving up your credentials. One I see all the time, and I always have a giggle, is somebody tries to impersonate Microsoft and say it's time to change your password, and every time it's like, I do not know who you're emailing. I'm not going to fall for this. But it always cracks me up. But it's a good try. But
Yeah.
Lots of people would probably just put in their old password and their new password, thinking they're changing it, and then that's immediately how the attacker gets in. They will sit around and just watch your email activity, understand your billing cycles, and then basically try to intercept your next round of invoicing. That's a very common thing that takes place. So the email side of things, I think, is a very easy win, that and a very cost-effective win right out of the gate that companies should worry about. The next thing, I think, in ransomware, I mean, that's a real obvious one. And that's, I think, been a big focus of the last 5 years, and that's where somebody somehow gets malware onto your computer, and then will either delete your intellectual property or encrypt it. And then that basically locks you out of your system. We've seen some really interesting attacks over the years where an attacker will get in and just go hog wild, to another case where an attacker will get in and they'll sit there for a month and just kind of figure things out. And then when they decide to encrypt everything, the whole network just goes offline. So there's different characteristics. There's the assumption that cyber insurance will take care of this, but I think that is, I mentioned earlier, it's a good thing to have. If you can get cyber insurance, that's great. But I think a bigger worry that people should be a little more cognizant of is data loss or intellectual property theft. In particular, if you are in legal or financial services or accounting, any of those industries, your customer data is huge. And if you get compromised, even if there's a ransomware side of it, they've probably taken all that data, scooped it up, and are now selling it. So you can imagine your entire portfolio of customers, all their personal information, banking information being compromised. We talked about trust earlier. That's a much bigger, I think, thing to be concerned about. So it's not just the ransomware piece, it is the protection of your customer data. That side of things is it's pretty important.
I'm so thankful that GGFL works with Field Effect right now. You and I have never really had sort of like an in-depth conversation at some of these things, and I appreciate that you're sharing. You're getting at my question with a far better answer than it deserves, which is really about the access points, because it's not just me at GGFL. It's every single person at GGFL, right? So, and I mean, we do everything we can in terms of education and testing, and and you have to trust. You have to trust all your people, but beyond that, you have to work with professionals that you have vetted and trusted as well. So access is easy. And one of the scariest pieces you just told me is that somebody could come in unknowingly, sit there and learn about you and look at things for as long as they should so please before they pull the trigger to do something. But the damage largely could have even already, obviously lots of damage has been done up to that point. So one of probably about 1 million examples that you can share. I mean, the threats are big, probably countless. And I just want to shift focus, talk about, what do we do about that as business leaders? How do we prevent cyber crimes, from occurring in the company? And I know we talked about insurance, so we don't prevent cybercrime by having insurance, because nobody is sort of putting out there that they have cyber insurance, and that scares people away, like your alarm on your house, like that. So that that's not how it works. But how do we? You've talked a lot about the business risks and the vulnerabilities about cybersecurity, and in terms of what the requirements of cybersecurity would be to get there. So you talked about we need to be proactive. Is really one of the threads that I'm taking from what you're saying. What do we do? How do we start? How do we start?
Yeah. So, really good question. It's, I think, a mindset shift to begin with. It's, over the years, we've seen the, I guess, the general shift from I'm probably fine because my company's not big enough, or why would anybody want to hack me? And so I don't need to worry about it. And, you go back 5 years ago, and that was something we heard pretty often, whereas I think the awareness is starting to be raised. So that's a positive thing, but I think that mental shift to taking the problem really seriously is it just you have to do it. You have to just acknowledge it's like living in Tornado Alley and basically being guaranteed to be hit by a tornado, and then having the opportunity to basically prevent that tornado from hitting you. Everybody will be attacked. Cyber attacks are constantly happening, so you have to take it seriously. One thing I would recommend doing is not assuming that your in-house IT team can just fix the problem or tackle it. And that's something I'm not throwing shade at IT teams or anything like that. But I think an accurate analogy is you wouldn't ask your general practitioner, your family doctor, to perform open heart surgery. It's just a different field. You've got a great family doctor, I'm sure, but you would never turn around and ask this person to, do a heart transplant. You just wouldn't, because they're not trained to do it. And it's a similar thing with cybersecurity. You could have the best IT team in the world, and unless they have been doing this for decades, they're just not going to be able to thwart sponsored ransomware groups out of China or Russia that are being paid a ton of money, that have been trained in the intelligence space, and turned into an entire industry over there. You just can't compete against that. So I guess the awareness and the cognizance that you need to outsource this type of thing. The next thing I would say is don't assume that you can just install a bunch of technology to fix the problem. This is a conversation I have quite frequently, where what are you doing to protect your network? And it's like, oh well, we installed this antivirus, and we've got this installed in this backup system. And my immediate question is, okay, what happens at 3 a.m.? And that look of realization, it's like it's a valid point. I don't know what happens at 3 a.m. because the IT team is asleep. I would assume maybe Microsoft would let me know that I'm being hacked, and that's just not the case. So from an SME standpoint, I mean, we're kind of dovetailing a little bit as to why I founded Field Effect, and it's because there are not enough security professionals in the world to help SMEs. So outsourcing that to a managed service is, I think, a key part of it. It's you don't put together your own alarm system. You would engage with a company to install cameras and door or glass breaks and whatnot, and then they monitor your office 24/7. It's a similar concept in cybersecurity. If you really want to protect your company, put that in the hands of people who do this for a living and have that 24/7 monitoring capability. The other thing to be aware of is how attackers actually look at you. They're not going to look at just the front door of your network and say, that's how I'm going to attack it. When they are preparing to attack your company, they will profile social media accounts. They will do external scans. They will learn about your business relationships. Often, if you're a company being attacked, it's because one of your supply chain or relationships got attacked and they found your email and became aware of you in somebody else's inbox. And that's something that all of a sudden you become on the radar. When an attacker goes after a company, they know a lot about you. They know how to compromise you. So they're going to attack you from every angle. Visibility over where your data is at rest. So where is it in the cloud? What's your email setup? How many computers do you have? All really important things because that's how an attacker is going to attack you. So if you do not have awareness and monitoring on all those locations, then you're leaving something open for attack. It's similar to arming your house at night, locking all the doors, and then somebody left a window open in the back and they just sneak in that way. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's much more complicated, but that's probably a watered down view of it.
Yeah, the analogies are helpful. And, I think it's appropriate to take a moment and just to, not for you, but for the rest of us, just to be a little shocked, because we want to think about how clever, how persistent, how much time, money, and energy is put into hacking, and businesses need to up their game to match some of that, right? In terms of their desire to be knowledgeable, to work with, and I'm not talking about being knowledgeable in terms of like what you and Field Effect do for your clients, but to be knowledgeable in a way that we understand the risk to our business, where we might be vulnerable, engage with professionals to make sure that we have appropriate security to prevent the inevitable, which is somebody is going to try and hack us. And not once, but many times. And they've learned about us and they'll continue to look for sort of the holes, right? And so I also, just to telling you what I'm learning, Matt, but I also, think about if we cast this net over ourselves of security, as an analogy, they'll keep looking for holes, right? So it will always change and you will always have to adapt and react. And there is no business owner who has the time, the knowledge, and the ability to do all of this themselves and run their business. And so from that perspective, what are the types of security on the market that they should be looking for? What approaches, do you recommend taking when it comes to cybersecurity?
So this might come across a tad self-serving, but it's because the approach that we've taken at Field Effect is the right way to solve it. I mean, Field Effect is a company that is comprised of people who have been hacking into things their entire life on behalf of Five Eyes intelligence missions, all the way to defending against
on the right side.
On the right side, yes.
Just want to reiterate that on the right side of it.
So the way we look at it, I'm just giving background as to the way we look at it is
it's helpful. Yeah.
It's a holistic problem. So when I talked about all those different points where somebody can attack you, if you're going out and you want to protect your company, look for a holistic solution, one that is one singular capability that protects your endpoints, so your computers, your servers, one that protects your network, so has an awareness of what network traffic is happening in your office, for example. This is important. You never know when somebody's going to come in and accidentally plug in a device, or when a courier is going to be actually working on behalf of a bad entity and decides to plug in a computer or a small little mini computer. Like there's so many ways to attack a company. It's crazy. Actually, great show to watch, Mr. Robot.
Okay.
It'll scare the pants off you, but it's probably one of the most accurate shows in regards to how hacking works. And then also on the holistic side, protecting your email accounts. So try to get that whole picture. So a set of questions to always ask, I think, your IT team is, how are you protecting our endpoints? How are you protecting our network and how you're protecting our cloud. Those are the very basic components that if you don't have good answers there, then you're leaving a hole open. A managed service I highly recommend a managed service. As I said, there's just not enough people in the world to service every company in there. Like I think there are people like cybersecurity professionals make upwards of $1 million a year, depending on where they are in the world and what company they work for. And if you need to build a team of 3 or 4 of these people to manage your own in-house cybersecurity, I mean, it's just cost prohibitive. You can't do it. That doesn't even take into consideration the cost of the technology. So if you can find a good partner that will provide that monitoring, that 24/7 monitoring piece. So if you get attacked at 2 or 3 in the morning, they are the ones responding, isolating the attack. So when you wake up, you get a report that says, hey, you've been attacked, but don't worry, we've taken care of it. Everything's fine. This is how we recommend, maybe making a network change or an update to your IT security setup to make sure that attack doesn't happen again. So holistic and managed service, those are the 2 things that if you really want this problem to go away, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll never go away. I think I've accepted that at this point in our conversation, but to be prepared and protected is what's really important. So no band-aids, no patches, find the experts that can really get to know your business and give you that holistic approach. So that's our takeaway. I'm just considering about how the world has changed, just the business world, and even I'm just going to go local here because that's where our participants are, but it's we shifted largely from working all together in one office, right? And I know that's physical, but it also has to do with how people access their systems and have largely gone remotely. And I'm wondering if that has any impact on how businesses need to shift in terms of how they are proactive in their approach to cybersecurity. And I want to hear about training for their people and the staff as well. But is it different or is it the same?
It's definitely different. I think it was a very quick forced transition on the world to go through the process of being a distributed workforce. If you look at how IT security or cybersecurity was largely handled prior to the pandemic, you could kind of create that moat around your environment or your network where, okay, if I have a firewall, that should be, hopefully good enough because all of my IT assets are in behind that firewall. Not largely, accurate to assume that it was safe, but it at least gave you or companies the impression that, okay, this is my office. All of my IT assets are physically inside that office and within that cone of protection. And when everybody transitioned to working from home, that immediately became not the case. So I think there was a big transition to, okay, let's think about this from a data problem. Where's our data residing? What do the accesses look like? What are where does every employee live? And I think conceptually that was a big shift. I think the technology was available when the pandemic started to allow companies to take care of that, but it wasn't without the spending penalty. So I don't have visibility over what the worldwide increase in cybersecurity was due to the pandemic, but I would bet that oh crap moment in April of 2020 when everybody was working from home definitely had a cost associated with it. Let alone the physical assets of having to, make sure every employee had a good spot to work out of their home office. But yeah, it was definitely a transition. But and I think it's, I don't think globally we're ever going to go back to everybody back in the office, regardless of what in particular company positions are on that. Like I think it's just a new reality that the problem is now, okay, where's my data? Who's accessing my data? How am I protecting my data? Where is it going? And having visibility and awareness over that is a much bigger challenge now.
So you have to trust your people, right? So in terms of where is the data, you have to make sure that your data is actually put back in the repository, right? Or only accessed in whatever that house is. So what do you see or what do you recommend when it comes to training?
Training's a big one. I think if I were to prioritize cybersecurity training for employees, I would start with the basics right now. Going back to the example you used earlier in regards to getting those bogus emails in your inbox and knowing how to identify them and what's good, what's bad. I think if we were able to shut that entire attack surface down, so every person in Canada, at least every professional in Canada that was working with email, could identify a bad email and take the very simple steps to examine, the from field a little bit more metadata about, what does this email look like? Do these images look right? Why would I be getting this email? The step that you take to call somebody up and verify that it is what it is. I think a little bit more training in that area would go a long way. There's also policies and standards that a company could adopt. So ISO 27001 is basically kind of what you described as that framework around making good decisions and putting the data back, so to speak, after you're done with it, and that good practice. It's a larger framework to learn, and there's a cost associated with getting it. But once you have it, calling back to the trust component, it's a good thing if you're working with companies or if your supply chain has companies that are certified to ISO 27001, because they've gone through that. That they have those procedures and practices in place to protect your data, to protect customer data, and to make sure that whatever commercial engine is that brings them revenue is in a good spot.
It reminds me of the weakest link, right? Like nobody wants to be that. That really is the vulnerability. Yep. Is your weakest link, and that's not always technology, right? It is people sometimes, and just because we're doing our work and we move quickly, it is important to be really thoughtful and just even know what those triggers are, right? So you mentioned some of them. Examine the from field, because sometimes it's as simple as putting a dash in something that can really escape your attention if you're not paying attention. Something seems wrong, it probably is wrong. So it's okay to be skeptical. And if you've done something and clicked on something that you then regret and think maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, get past your embarrassment. What's that?
I said, don't just run out the door and
exactly. Get over yourself, get past the embarrassment, because it's really not about you. It's really about what happens after the click, right? Or the password change, whatever you've done to potentially get them access, is speak up immediately to the right people in your organization so that it can be addressed. And if you're working with a company that can manage this for you, then maybe they already know and they're already reacting and notifying you. But in the absence of that, I think we all have a responsibility to hold ourselves accountable to doing these things. And I think it's fair, for business owners and leaders in business to make sure that accountability is just a well-known expectation amongst the whole team, right? So to trust one another, but it means we all have to stand up and act accordingly too. So I'm going to switch gears, because let's say we've done everything right. I mean, in the absence of anything going wrong, sometimes things will go wrong. So we plan and things don't always go according to plan. Even if we followed all the right steps, a breach could still occur. My heart goes into my throat when I think about that, but it can still occur. But so the important piece after that, the really critical piece, is understanding what some of the key indicators are to even understand that you've been compromised. So like what are some of the things that we should, have our alarm bells go off with?
That one's a bit more difficult, because a good attacker, you won't know that something's wrong until literally the house is burning down. So the visibility and awareness over all your assets, I mean, that's definitely the step one, I think. If something goes wrong, I think it's a wise thing to prepare and I guess be conscious that something could go wrong. Like if to use an example, the SolarWinds attack that happened, or it came to light about, oh goodness, time's flying, about a year and a half ago. Large companies got compromised that spend millions on cybersecurity a year. And what happened was a remote management system, SolarWinds, had a problem. Their source code database, or source code base, got compromised. An attack was built into that, and then that was spread to every one of their customers. So when you think about how much money and how much sophistication goes into that entire chain, like you're 100% correct, something bad could happen. So it's you never know what that weakest link actually is. So preparing for that is a very wise thing to do. So what is the plan? Like if you know an attack has happened, who's being notified? Are you do you have a vendor set up on retainer to come in for an incident response? How are you notifying customers? How are you isolating systems and data? And then, what's the recovery process? And this type of thing is different for every company, but taking the time to prepare and have a plan in place is huge. It can greatly reduce the damage that happens on the front end of the attack, and it can greatly reduce the time it takes you to get back up and running. It's something that involves everybody ranging from IT people to executives, because executives might be needing to make phone calls or engaging with customers or talking to media and explaining what has happened and being very open and forthcoming about it. The other thing to do is potentially a tabletop exercise, and that's where you test your internal IT team around different types of attacks and how do they respond. And then really see, whether they're up to the task at any given point to work with potentially an outsourced vendor or internally with staff to mitigate a problem and manage it. I like to use the analogy of you don't if you want to build a military, you don't just hire a bunch of people, hand them guns, and say play cards until we're attacked. I mean, you run drills, you constantly practice to make sure they know how to defend a country, right? So it's a similar concept. You're not good at anything unless you practice it. So a tabletop exercise is, I think, something that is hugely valuable for a company. And if knock on wood, hopefully you never get attacked or an attack is never successful. But if that happens, you're just in a much better place. People aren't scrambling and wondering, who do we call? Like I've seen it various times, situations where that the fear and the panic around a cyber attack it's overwhelming, and it can cripple a company monetarily, but also functionally and mentally, because it's such a frightening thing.
I feel like those moments after like you've realized that something is not right, that you've been attacked, are really critical. I love the idea of having this tabletop exercise. It's one thing to commit it to your disaster business plan. I think that's critical, so everyone is working from the same base, right? About what do we do and who's doing it. But I would hate to think that something goes wrong and I say, hang on a second, I'm going to grab this plan, which, I stored electronically and I can't access it now. And, so whatever that means, but the documentation and having access to the documentation, I think is smart for sure, but not being out of practice, right? So knowing and making every minute count after you've been attacked sounds like it's really critical to sort of nip it in the bud, because I imagine that it typically would evolve, right? So the attack starts, but it probably doesn't just end there. Once they have access, it's like, what else is interesting in here maybe, and could become far worse, whether that's locking down your data and any number of things that you've mentioned to us. But I love that idea of the exercising the plan.
It's fun.
And not
it's fun
just
too.
once. Yeah.
You put a bunch of nerds in the room. They enjoy these types of things. It's good.
I just want to be a fly on the wall, because I find it really interesting, and at the same time, excuse myself, because I have no real knowledge to be able to keep up with the experts, but do want to be informed, and that's really what today is about. I need to know enough to know, what do I need to do about it in terms of protecting the business and all of our customers, all of our client data, and feel comfortable that we have the right people and systems and protection in place that we can trust. And I just can't emphasize this word trust enough. I know we've said it several times, but I'm just going to circle back around, if you don't mind, to the idea of insurance. So,
sure.
If you've got the insurance financially, you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable. So check the box. Not enough, because insurance, if something happens, you're going to call your insurance company and they may have you engage with somebody to try and fix the problem. But, you know, now it's through third party. I have no idea who these people are. I'm sure they're lovely, vetted by the insurance company, but I'm a little bit paranoid at this point if I'm with a company that has been attacked, right? So can you give us some process, questions, guidelines? Like where should our heads, our thoughts and our headspace be in terms of knowing that we're working with the right people, companies, so that we can sleep at night and know we've got it all in place and ready to go?
So from a security standpoint,
Mhm.
so you mean like in a supply chain type of scenario?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, I mean, because all of this is beyond setting up these relationships, and sometimes they're set up on my behalf, and I want to make sure I'm comfortable with those relationships. It's like, you know, can I feel good about it? What do I do to feel good about that?
I think a good question to ask is what security framework or cybersecurity framework are they using? Don't ask do they have one. Ask them if they which one they're using. So I mentioned ISO 27001 earlier. There's various others that you can ask about, and if they have something, then I think that's a good step. I would ask, how big is their security services team or internal security team? And if the answer is, oh, we have an IT team, the follow-up question would be, okay, who do you bring in to handle cybersecurity? And the answers to that should be, oh, we use this company over here, or and if it's nobody and they don't have an internal security team, then there's a huge gap. There's a massive gap. You could drill down into, how are you going to protect our data? Where does our data reside? Is it in the cloud? Is it on your internal servers? Which then, you can dovetail into additional questions as to, okay, how are you protecting your email? How are you protecting the servers that our data is stored on? And typically these types of questions, they surface when you're bidding on like larger government contracts or that type of thing, because the government tends to be a little bit more structured around, okay, prove to us that you are protecting our data and our privacy as we'd expect. I don't think that's really made its way into the commercial world as much quite yet, but I think from just chatting this out, it'd be really quite interesting to see that evolution happen over the years, where just day to day, like we don't ask any legal or financial firm who we've dealt with, like, how are you protecting our data? And as I'm talking here, I'm asking myself, why on earth not?
Yeah.
You should be asking those questions. So I'll stop rambling there, but I think I guess the message that I've kind of organically arrived to here would be to don't be afraid to ask those questions.
Yeah, it's interesting where you landed, because it's not just asking your cybersecurity partners what's going on in house. How do I know that we've got the right, it's the right fit, and I'm gonna feel like we've got the best protection. It's not just those professionals; it's anybody who's housing your data entirely, right? And I think that those are really fair questions, and I'm hoping that people who are listening today will take the time to learn a little bit more. What we can't do, as I mentioned in the beginning, is cannot stick your head in the sand. This, I think, for many people is a really overwhelming topic and threat, and to assume that it's not going to happen to us as individuals or as businesses is it's not realistic. And so it really is about readiness and preparedness, not just the documentation, but the actual action that needs to happen if something goes wrong. Well, I'm going to ask you one final question, and it's going to be a quick one. And then I'll just see if we have any questions. I've been trying to monitor it as we've been speaking, and I think you've probably answered a lot of the questions as we've gone on, which is really great. Just back to this practice piece and this tabletop exercise. How often, given the fact that I assume that if I'm a hacker and I'm successful and people have caught on, I need to change my tactics. So all of those things are constantly going to be changing and adapting to such that they can be successful at hacking. How often do we need to practice and amend perhaps our plan?
I think in an ideal world, quarterly would be good. Just, put 2 hours aside, or I guess that depends on the complexity of what your plan and tabletop exercise is. Quarterly, I think, keeps you sharp. Annually, bare minimum. And also if there's any significant network change. So if you're a company and you've been hosting your own email server for the history of your company, and you change to use cloud-based email, now's a good time to update your response plan and your tabletop exercise. So just because it's a significant material change in how your data flows and where it resides. So quarterly ideal, annually bare minimum, and definitely when there's a significant change to IT infrastructure.
Yeah, great note. It's not just about the passage of time. It's if anything changes, and if we know anything, that change is inevitable, right? So understanding how the change can touch all of those pieces is really important to make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, as they say, I suppose. So I don't know that we have any more questions that we haven't really answered. And I know that there's lots of resources that's posted in the chat as well. So people can grab those links, please do. There'll be a follow-up email as well that will come out with those resources to share with everybody, so you have some time to go through it. And I do have just one question actually that came in. So I want to share, are there any recommendations for protecting social media accounts and websites built on WordPress?
That's a bit of a tougher one. I think social media accounts in general, I would say always be aware of what you're posting. It's a huge source for initial recon. So if I'm an attacker and I'm going to target an executive team, I'm going to go through your entire social media history. I'm going to look for boo-boos and photos taken, addresses. That's one thing that I always have a giggle. Someone takes a picture out front and there's their address and a picture of their house, and it doesn't take too long to figure out where somebody physically resides. Traveling, I'm not really much for social media because I'm like one of these tinfoil hat type of people when it comes to cybersecurity. But be careful with traveling. I wouldn't post too much about what hotel you're staying at. Like these types of things matter. If you are a higher profile enough person, which I think any business owner or executive or decision maker is, I don't underestimate how much people actually care about you from an attacker's standpoint. So that would be the first thing. In regards to WordPress, I think any website being built, that's more of a development question. So if you're putting together any type of programmatic resource you're putting on the internet, a website is an example of that. You got to make sure you have good processes to review the source code and make sure whatever it is you're doing. Hosting is also a big deal. This is less about WordPress and more about who's hosting your website. Make sure that it's being hosted by a company that has anti-denial of service protections in place, so your website can't be taken down and whatnot. So that's probably the best I can answer the question without knowing too much more about the specific technology.
Yeah, protecting your personal information at all costs, right? Being thoughtful of your surroundings. Those are things that we don't really, especially if we're on vacation, we don't really are taking personal photos. We take for granted that we might be exposing something that could be really useful and make us vulnerable. So I have another question about penetration testing, and really at what point is that best done? Is it after you've sort of dealt with everything else, you've addressed all the other pieces, or earlier in the process? What's the best time?
I think in an ideal world, you bring in a vendor that can actually do the equivalent of penetration testing in real time. That's one of the tough things with penetration testing is, I mean, the question highlights that it is a point in time. So how do you choose that point in time? After any type of substantial IT change or network change, or how your employees access the resources that comprise the company's IT set. Anytime there's a change to that, you can probably invest in a pen test. It's a bit challenging because they are typically on the expensive side, which is why I'm kind of hot and cold with them. A good pen tester can get some really good results. Problem is, as soon as somebody changes something, the results of the pen test are somewhat invalidated, right? So it's a bit of a challenge.
Got it. The questions are coming in fast and furious now, so I think we've got time for maybe a couple more, and we'll get through what we can. And I have no doubt that the resources that we're going to share are going to be really helpful when people read through them and get lots of information. And obviously can reach out to Field Effect as well if they have questions and specific to themselves too. So one of the questions is, what should we ask our software providers to feel comfortable they're protecting our data? So this question targets software providers. I know we talked about asking about data protection for any number of firms that we might work with, but this one is about the software.
I'll focus on software as a service because that's been a very large transition over the past 5, 6, 7 years. Typically, if you are installing software on your network, you control your data. But in the case where software as a service is coming into play, I think that's a really good thing to think about, where the data is being stored. That is something that I think a question isn't asked frequently enough. So if you are using a cloud service to store your data, I think there's a lot of financial and accounting packages now that encourage you to store everything in the cloud, which is fine. But questions like, okay, where's my data going? So if you're a Canadian accounting company and you're using one of these systems, is the data being stored in the United States? And there's nothing wrong with the United States, clearly. It's just, does that potentially violate customer trust? Does that present a problem in regards to data privacy laws? And I don't think in that example it necessarily does. But I think there's a lot of assumptions that, okay, well, I'm working with a Canadian company, so my data must be residing in Canada. Cloud providers, or let me take a step back. A lot of these companies that provide software as a service will use like AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google. And I don't remember off the top of my head which ones actually give you the ability to choose where your data goes. But there are some cases where they will just put your data wherever you want. It'll probably be in North America, but it's a question worth asking. Are they encrypting the data on the back end is another good one to ask. And who in their company has access, and what are the access controls around it? So if there's a database or a series of databases that backs your data when it's being stored, can one of their employees just walk up with a USB stick, transfer it all onto a USB stick, and then we'll walk out the door? So that's on the access control and auditing and logging is a big piece there. And if they push back or can't answer that question, it would definitely be some alarm bells for me.
Yeah, fair. Avoiding that question is could have some pretty big consequences. And I appreciate that it's not just I think of data as a sort of thing that kind of floats around, and it does a little bit, but it could be as simple as somebody walking in with something in their pocket and walking out with more in their pocket than they came in.
I could tell you some horror stories, but I don't think it would help. I think I've probably been a little bit too doom and gloom this morning. So.
I think that we're sufficiently we've been warned, and I think it's fair. Here's another thing that I think we are all dealing with and have been for many years at this point. But what about employees using their own devices? So what can companies do from that standpoint? How much can we protect ourselves?
That's a pickle.
This is a people thing too. It is, yeah. I know it's touchy.
I mean, it's a tough one, because if you want to go all the way to the right of treating customer devices with the same level of scrutiny as your business devices, you can do that. There are software mechanisms called MDMs that allow you to register and manage devices so the IT or the actual IT team has awareness over what devices are being used. I would recommend that. Employees typically probably won't like it, just
Mm.
because, you know, from an employee standpoint, it's like, well, it's my device. But from a company standpoint, but you're accessing our data on that device. So I think as an evolutionary goal for a company, I would move towards using an MDM to manage your devices and also any devices that are personal devices for your employees, but they want to use to access customer data or company data. I think that is that's a very reasonable thing. And what an MDM typically will allow you to do is it'll help you with control. If somebody loses, you know, one of those devices, you'll remotely be able to block access on that device to that data. And in some cases, you'll actually be able to delete the data that's on that device. So it's good for the case where if an employee leaves the company and they don't return a device, or just having the ability to say, we are confident that our data is no longer on that device of a person who's no longer in the company. And I think that's something that I would definitely recommend if bring your own devices is an accepted policy.
Yeah, that makes sense, and certainly a tough thing to navigate, I think. So it's not as simple
It's
as
never
making a
simple.
demand. So yeah, it's never simple. I think we can all appreciate that it's never simple. But thanks again, Matt. This has been really informative and valuable, and there's lots of resources coming to all the participants again. So please take the time to read it, to be thoughtful in your own businesses and lives about how you can protect yourself, to be prepared, and the first step to that is just becoming aware. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Matt, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you, Natalie.